welcome back to another episode of Card Talk, a podcast where we spend just a little bit of time in February talking about new players in the game. I'm your host, Dave Walsh.
And I am the web blogmaster dude guy, Matt Kell.
Matt, I feel bad about that from the other day when I was like, I couldn't say blogmaster off the top of my head, and I was like, you were the web, I wanted to say webmaster, but like talk about a word that's going to date me, right? Webmaster, right? Like nobody's a webmaster anymore. So I was like, web blogmaster dude guy, because you're a dude and a guy, like that's fun stuff there. Not trying to be like toxic masculine or anything. It's just like, right? Like, I don't know. Anyways. So I apologize if you're offended, but apparently you're okay with it because you just used it as your intro here.
I'm highly amused as you stumbled across that. Just, I don't know. I cracked up laughing when I watched that before.
That's good. I'm glad that that's the way it worked. But Matt, I wanted to let you know that here at Card Talk, we normally go in depth in player cards once a week. We spend one show going over one card, but in February, we put all that on hold to bring you our extravaganza month. You know, we've done Sylvan February, we've done Couples February. Last year, we did Superlative February. We've done all sorts of crazy things. This year, we're doing New Player February. FFG just released the revised core set, and it's important for us to kind of address that. Probably as one of the staples in the community of content. So, but we're also going to use this month to ask you, the listeners, to support us a little bit. Our kind of flagship area is the YouTube channel that has all our shows, all our playthroughs, all our bonus content, all that stuff. If you could, I'm no good at saying this or doing this, but I'm going to say, let's see, if you could subscribe, like, and hit the notification button. I don't know, something like that. That's what YouTubers say, but that's how often we ask people to do that sort of stuff. We also
I'm only laughing because I watch too many of the channels with my daughter, and it's like, subscribe, hit the bell, and comment and stuff like that.
Right? Yeah. It's all those.
All
things.
of them do it.
Right. Feed the algorithm is what Ted would say, and we do have an audio side which has all our normal podcasts, and so if you go to your podcatcher, you could rate and review us. That would be great because that helps push our content up the list for people who are looking for reliable content in the community. So that would be good. And Matt, you could talk a little bit about the blog. Normally I'm talking about the blog, but hey, the webmaster blog dude guy, the web blog dude master guy is here with us. So Matt, what about the blog?
So we have a blog at cardtalk2018.com that where I write card reviews to go with the podcast episodes. And for New Player February, I've been diving back into the Card Talk archive to find core set cards to review that the pod has already talked about. And hopefully I can expand on some areas that the hosts hadn't previously touched on. I was about to say which one just got reviewed, but probably by the time people see this, it'll be a few weeks ago. So there'll be one core set card from each sphere within February. So
okay, yeah, Matt, you do good work over there. I know that you're the newest addition to Card Talk, but I feel like you've been around for a while, and I love what you do over there at the blog. So the last thing that we would really love to have you do, we need some money to help keep the lights on at the pod and help with hosting fees over at the blog. And so we have a Patreon, and so you can look right down here and you can see that we have a Patreon. We send out swag to all our patrons. The people at $5 a month and up, they get the big stuff, but everybody gets a little something. So you just have to be a patron between April and when Con of the Rings hits, which is sometime in late
October.
September, early October, depending on what's going on. Whew. But all of that, well, we better get into what we want to get into, right? In New Player February, we've gone through all the phases of the game. We've talked about what Card Talk is and what we do here at at this creators, I don't know, whatever extravaganza stuff, you create over at the blog, I'm creating here at the pod. And so here we're going to talk about deck building. And so we're going to talk specifically about deck building using the core set, which is slightly different than deck building with the with a broader or bigger card pool. But Matt has been playing forever, and if you go over to the blog, you can see his playthroughs and some of the things that has happened. And even recently, he was posting playthroughs of the campaign of the Shadows of, I don't know what they're calling it, the Shadows of Mirkwood campaign. Is that what it's called?
I think I saw someone say Paths of Mirkwood over on Reddit is something, might be what it's called, but I just been calling it the core campaign.
Yeah. So the core campaign, with a deck that was developed years ago by a user, I think it's Warlock 000 or something like that, right?
Yeah, that's actually a recent update since now the revised core has 3 copies of cards, and oddly enough, he went to 2 copies on most of the cards instead of 3.
Oh, that's weird.
So far, it seems to be working though.
Yeah, so Matt is, I would say, been around the game long enough to know how to build a deck or two for sure, and I've been doing it pretty well. I'm going to channel my inner Ted because Ted has a couple of points that he wanted me to make sure that I brought up here too. But the core set, Matt, brings up some unique deck building challenges because you can, maybe not challenges, but you're really pigeonholed a little bit, because if you're like a thematic player and you really wanted to play a Hobbit deck, or you really wanted to play a Rohan deck, you can't really play those sorts of decks right out of the core set. You're really stuck just kind of playing cards out because they're good or they kind of fit what you need in the moment. And so maybe it would be good to talk a little bit about what each sphere does in the core set a little bit. So Matt, when you think of leadership in the core set, what are you thinking about?
I'm mostly thinking about resource acceleration, because you got Steward of Gondor, and it's just the best resource acceleration in the game other than Vilya.
Yeah,
it definitely is in the core set.
Yeah, and Theodred also is a kind of resource acceleration. So, and when we say resource acceleration, Matt, what do we mean?
It means getting additional resources that you could put on your heroes besides at the beginning of the round.
Right. And so lore, I would, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I would guess that lore is kind of like the tricky sphere, right? Like it kind of does a little bit of everything. But it's like if you need some little trick to help you out, that's kind of the reputation it has. And I think in the core set there's some cards that also kind of back that up.
Yeah, so you've got a little bit of encounter scrying with Henemarth River Song and Lord Denethor Hero. And Lord Denethor Hero, you don't just get to look at the top card, you can put it back on the bottom. So there's a little bit of encounter control there to be like, all right, not only do I know what's coming, but if it's really bad, I could just slip it underneath and not have to deal with it.
Yep. Spirit? What's Spirit?
I might be getting to veteran player here, where I always think of Spirit as the willpower sphere.
Mm-hmm.
But it's one of those things that's because later expansions gave you a lot of the efficient questing allies.
Right.
And you got core set, you really only have Eowyn to really be like, there's the truly efficient questing character. And Spirit,
but what a questing character she is, right?
Yeah. It's like, 4 willpower in the core set before they start getting too crazy with threat on every card.
Right.
I mean, you got brown lands that gives you 5 threat, but a lot of the cards are 2 or 1 threat.
Right.
And
But I think there's also what we call pseudo questing in Spirit, which helps with questing. So pseudo questing is when you put progress directly on some place, or you lower the threat of something, which the effect is the same as if you had an increase in willpower, but the idea is that you don't have to just increase the willpower. So there's things like Northern Tracker and Lorien Guide that are also, I would consider, pretty powerful cards right out of the gate in Spirit, along with some threat lowering, right?
right.
So I think that all of that kind of is the questy side of life.
Well, you also have to your pseudo questing point, you got a test of will, and the core
Right.
set has a lot of those increased threat of enemies or locations in the staging area treacheries.
Right.
And so you could be looking at, increasing the stage area threat by 2, 3, 4, depending on how many encounter cards are in the stage area. But then Test of Will just says no.
Right. And then you have that one treachery, massing at night,
Oh yeah,
which makes you reveal even more cards, and if you cancel that, you can. So yeah. So there's a lot of things that have to do with questing, I think, in the Spirit sphere. And the last one is, I think this is true for the life of the game, but I think that tactics really is the combat sphere. It really doesn't, there's a little bit of what we call bleed into other things the later we get into deck building and the bigger your card pool gets. But I think that tactics kind of has always stayed like in its lane the most. So
yeah, it definitely has got the least amount of spear bleed. So I think it took several years before we got a decent questing tactics hero.
right.
And tactics allies, even with the full card pool, it's really hard to get a character with 2 willpower and tactics.
Yeah.
And they tend to be expensive or unique or both.
Yeah. Right. Or don't, as I say, even the heroes in tactics, as your card pool expands, don't, they have high threat costs. There's just, tactics really stayed in its lane, with the exception of the one major tactics hero that I'm sure that everybody knows about, screaming at their device right now. You can't leave out tactics. Right. Of course, one exception to prove the rule, but but in general, the core set experience is kind of centered around those ideas, right? So if you need resource acceleration, you probably need to, or if you're thinking resource acceleration, you go to leadership. If you think you want to combat, you're going to go to tactics. If you think you need, questing or threat reduction, you're going to go to Spirit. If you need some tricks or some card draw, you're going to go to lore. And I mean, I think that those are general ideas to keep in mind as we move forward in this. And so I think it wouldn't be a new player deck building show if we didn't first address the Monosphere decks as they come out of the box. And so, Matt, in general, what do you think about those Monosphere decks? Now, before you go into it, let me just say, so for veteran players or people who are new but got the older core set, when there wasn't 3 of each card, those decks were 30 cards each. The revised core set now has made them 48 cards, which is at least closer to the, tournament legal, which is funny because there's no tournaments in this game. So, but the legal size deck of 50. But Matt, nonetheless, I gave you a little time there to think about it. What do you think of those decks out of the box?
think leadership was serviceable for a 30 card deck. Everything else was just too unbalanced to be really good beyond just seeing what the guards could do.
Yeah, I mean, I have to agree. I think you can squeak out some stuff with spirit, but that's about it. I think that Matt, you were right on when you say that, right? Like, you want to see what the cards do, so you play those decks against Passage Through Mirkwood, and you see what they can do, and you realize that tactics can't quest, and you're going to lose to Passage Through Mirkwood. You know, you figure out why some of the cards are really good, like Feint in the with the Hill Troll, or Forest Snare with the Hill Troll, or like whatever. But then I think that the real thing that you want to do is, after you're comfortable with what the cards do, you want to start mixing and matching stuff. Now, the rules say that you can build a deck with 1 to 3 heroes, but I don't think that it makes any sense right out of the rip to play a deck or build a deck with any less than 3 heroes, especially right out of the revised core set. Now, Matt, you could disagree, but I think that we'll come to blows if that happens. I think that, we'll fight about that.
No, I would agree. You're not going to get the cards you need to offset the loss of a hero for at least a couple of cycles. And even then, it was a difficult proposition to offset the loss of a hero with the secrecy cards and Kaza Doom and the Dwaradol cycle.
Yeah, and so it's so I would suggest that you keep it just pretty straightforward when you look at building. So Matt, now that we've laid this foundation, we know what the spheres do. We kind of have set up that we need 50 cards in a deck, and we're probably not going to use the Monosphere decks. Like, when we're putting together a deck, what do we consider when we're putting together that deck? What's the first thing that we should think of?
I tend to think about which are my 3 starting heroes, because that kind of sets up the composition of your deck in terms of the sphere mix. And I say that because, you point out, there's not quite enough cards in that core set to make a full 50 card deck with just 1 sphere. So you're looking at a minimum of dual sphere, if not tri-sphere. And with the old core set, tri-sphere probably was the better way to go, because you could put in more of the really good cards. With getting 3 copies now with the revised core set, I think dual sphere is much more doable, since you can get your 3 copies of Test of Will, 3 copies of Feint, put those in a Spirit Tactics deck, and be pretty well set to be like, all right, I can handle some emergency things either questing or in combat, and have a much better full list of allies to support your heroes with.
Yeah, I agree, and I would guess, and I've been around the game for a long time, so I think that you can really mix and match heroes pretty straightforwardly. Of course, there's some, like Matt and I, we've been doing those core combos, and then one of them was Aragorn and Theodred, so of course there's certain heroes that play off of each other. I guess to some degree, Barivor with her card draw, in Eowyn with pitching a card to boost her willpower. There's heroes that play off of each other, but I think that I think that you're free to do really what you want to do to see if it works. Like, I would say that you're not really limited. Like, there's no way that you should run Legolas with Thalon, or Legolas with Dunhere. Like, I think that you can try that out and see if it works. There's enough cards to let you try those things to see if you like that combination.
I would agree, especially since the core set scenarios, they have some high attack enemies, but there's a lot of smaller, low attack enemies without a lot of defense or even a lot of hit points. That there's a lot more flexibility to kind of go without just running Lord Denethor to block for everyone since he's the only one with 3 defense.
Right.
And, you could kind of run things because, Aragorn's got 2 defense, Bearvor's got 2 defense. They can defend decently against most of the enemies in there. They have a pretty good pool of hit points. And there's other things you could do. You could put in some healing to offset the lack of defense, or you can go right to just chump blocking things. So,
Oh, that's advanced considerations. Chump blocking. I'm just kidding. Yeah, I mean, and yeah, exactly what you're saying. Like so I think it's about experimenting and finding, like deciding in your head what you want. Now, there's a couple of different ways you can go about choosing which heroes you want. Maybe you really love Aragorn and you want to see Aragorn take on the Hill Troll. That's a perfectly legitimate way to play and to deck build. Have fun, like that's what you're doing. You're playing in, it's a cooperative game, or you're playing solo, so it's not like, people are going to get mad at you for trying something out.
exactly.
Not usually. I mean, there's every once in a while I really anger Ted, but that's for a different show. But so explore a little bit and think about what you want to do. If you want to have a deck that's going to really be focused in on combat, play something that's got a lot of tactics in it. Play those allies, play those events and attachments, and have fun with it. But I guess as you're selecting your heroes, keep in mind that you have to, like, with those heroes comes that cadre of cards. So if you leave out lore and then realize that, oh my goodness, I need card draw in order to make this deck work, well, you're going to be stuck. So you're going to have to go
You're going to be stuck with the Valiant Sacrifice.
Right, which is like the only outside of lore card draw effect.
Or Sneak Attack Gandalf.
Right, Gandalf, right. And
yeah, leadership's got a little bit of card draw to go in addition to lore, but you limit your options that way.
Right. And so I think that that's why we talk about, hero selection, and we talk about the spheres right from the very beginning, right?
Right.
And so, like, that's what you're trying to do. Now, if your heroes have some great interactions, that's cool. The other thing that you could do is you could also think about what you need in your deck from a standpoint of the quest. Okay, this is a slight spoiler alert, but that in the second scenario you have a hill troll that comes out first turn, and it has an engagement cost of 30. So the way to get around the hill troll is to just build a deck that the heroes have a low engagement cost. So you don't have to engage the hill troll right away. And so that's another option. Instead of building a deck where you're playing Aragorn because you love Aragorn, and you're playing Aragorn and Éowyn because you want to see that love story happen. Now you're going to play, Éowyn, Dunhere, and Legolas. You're playing just because you want to keep your threat low, and that's and so you can do that as well. But so there's a lot of different ways to think about how you're going to approach deck building. And that's kind of what do you want to deck build against the scenario? Do you want to deck build for things that are fun? The way that you want to play, the way that you're doing stuff. Do you want to see certain heroes interact with each other? Are you trying to build things that combo? I don't know. But the heroes kind of govern all of that from the beginning. And the shame of it is that with a complete card pool, you can build thematic decks, but you can't really do that out of the core set. You can't build a Hobbit deck out of the core set. You can't build a Rohan deck out of the core set. And so you're stuck really just playing functional cards. It's a card game, but that's what it is. Deck building is what you need to worry about.
Right, what you're talking about with thinking about what you want to have in your deck. This kind of, you gave a lot of examples with the heroes you might want to use in your hill troll example and everything else. But if you're looking at the card combos and saying, hey, I really want to, have sneak attack Gandalf, like that means you're locked into at least one leadership hero.
Right.
And so those kind of things too is like, if you're looking at the cards and being like, I really like the lore of Imladris and be able to heal someone up completely, that means you're going to be playing at least one lore hero. So there's no ways to give a hero another resource icon yet in the core set. You're gonna have to wait till later expansions to do things like that.
Right. They're coming
I guess there's
soon.
one. There's one, I should say.
Right.
Aragorn has one.
Aragorn has the
Celebrian
stone, right?
Yeah. So that could be also be a consideration if you're putting together a leadership spirit deck, you're get to like 50-50 mix. You're like, okay, I have 3 heroes. I can't split my resources 50-50 because I'll be getting 2 spirit resources and 1 leadership. So then you start going, okay, well, either I have to plan on waiting a turn and giving Steward of Gondor to the leadership hero, or I have to think about giving Celebrian Stone on Aragorn and giving him a spirit resource icon if I want to get more spirit cards, or if I want to run 2 leadership heroes and only 1 spirit person.
All right. And those are all the fun things to think about when you're building a deck, right? And those all still center around the hero and the hero selection, right? You look at the Celebrian Stone and you're like, oh, 2 willpower? That's awesome. Oh, Aragorn can get the spirit resource icon? That's a bonus. So the Celebrian Stone doesn't have to go on Aragorn. It doesn't even have to go on a leadership hero, but Aragorn gets a little extra bonus there for getting his grandmother-in-law. Celebrian is Elrond's wife, right?
I think so.
So
probably be a lot more greats in there.
Yeah. Well, but he married Arwen, right? And Elrond is Arwen's dad, and Celebrian is... Anyways.
Yeah.
That's where the lore comes in. Grant, we're thinking of you, buddy. But, as you put together your heroes and you decide what heroes you're putting together, Matt, you're exactly right. Like, you want to figure out what else is going to go into the deck. And then, so what are some of the other considerations, like, as you start, looking a little more carefully at what is going to go in the deck? Let's say we're just building a deck not based on the scenario, but just a deck that we want to function and kind of be successful, against stuff. Doesn't matter what scenario it is.
Well, then I would say then one thing to keep in mind is your sphere mix, just as I was talking about. You gotta think about like, okay, these heroes are getting a resource each turn. If I have, let's just go back to our previous example, 2 spirit heroes and 1 leadership, I'm going to have 1 leadership resource a turn and 2 spirit resources a turn. So in general, I'm going to want to draw more spirit cards than leadership ones, because that's where we have more resources to play. Barring other cards that give you resource acceleration, but then, you still have to draw that Steward of Gondor or mulligan aggressively for it and make sure that you can get it out quickly. But
is there such
a
thing
as
be mulliganing aggressively, Matt? It's like I don't want those cards. It's an aggressive mulligan.
Well, so I've seen the term bandied about in the community a few times. Back when I first started with the core set, there are a few times where I was like, I have to have Steward of Gondor, and I'd be like, draw my initial hand. Nope. Mulligan it up. Mulligan doesn't have either. Okay, lost 1. We're just going to do
it. Drawing over and over again until you get it, right?
Yeah.
I've never done that, Matt. Never. Meaning, yes, I've done that, Matt. Yeah, and to add to that about Sphere Mix, so like you want a third of your deck to be, represent. In general, I don't want to say you have to, but like in general, like if you have two spirit heroes and a leadership hero, then roughly 2/3 of it spirit cards and 1/3 of it leadership cards. Like I think that that's a general rule of thumb, and you can break that as you get more comfortable deck building. But I think that that's a good general rule. Now, I think the more technical thing to do is to look at the cost of the card than necessarily how how many of each card that you have. If every single leadership card that you have in this example that Matt and I are using only costs 1, I don't know if you can get away with that, but there's a lot of 1-cost cards in leadership, I think. But like then you're probably going to be able to play a lot of those leadership cards out there. So you may include some more leadership cards because it's cheap to play all of those leadership cards. On the other hand, if you're playing all the really expensive spirit cards, you have Northern Tracker, Lorien Guide, those cards, Galathram's Greeting in there, like all these cards that cost 3 and 4, you're going to be very frustrated because you're not going to be able to play them out, even though those cards are very good, like because you're waiting turns to play them. And so, if you have 2 Northern Trackers in your hand and you only have 2 Spirit Heroes, you have to wait until the second turn to play the first Northern Tracker, and then you're not playing the second one until the 4th turn, and you're not playing any other spirit cards in between. So
right,
the cost of the card is also an important consideration when you're thinking about constructing your deck to tackle things. I don't want to say it's maybe more important than the sphere breakdown, but I think that it's on par. So if you have cheaper cards, you can maybe shove a couple more cards of that sphere into the deck than the standard break. Now, I don't know exactly what the average cost is of each card in the sphere. I'm sure somebody's figured this out, but I know that leadership is a little bit more expensive because it does have Steward of Gondor in it. So there, a lot of those cards can be a little bit more expensive. So, maybe Steward of Gondor, Sneak Attack, those cards are get put in there. I don't know. Those are the things that I think about when I'm putting together a deck.
No, you're absolutely right. And one of the things I usually look at is my cost curve in total, even not even just by sphere breakdown. So depending on the quest pace and everything else, like some quests, you can kind of stall on turn 1, kind of going back to the Hill Troll example. If you're low enough threats, you could probably, camp out on stage 1 for several turns, especially if you include threat reduction, not have to take that Hill Troll for a while and just build up your board state. So you might get away with having a higher cost curve, putting in some more 3s and maybe even an additional 4 or something like that if you plan for it. Whereas some of the other ones, they're much more aggressive, like with the unboxing video, you had like 3 enemies within 3 turns right, that you all had to deal with immediately. And those those scenarios where they could come out swinging, you want to keep that cost curve low and stick to 1-2 cost cards, because you need to play a card, if not 2 cards every turn, just to stay at the same pace as the encounter deck, if not. And you really want to get ahead of it if possible.
And so staying ahead of it also means that not only can you play allies, but you can get what we call action advantage too. So there's certain cards that give you action advantage, which are very powerful. And so what we mean by action advantage is being able to get more than one use out of a card every turn. So Aragorn has built-in action advantage as long as he has a resource on him, wherever you get that resource from. And so he can exhaust a quest, and then he can ready and be used again. And so Spirit also has unexpected courage, and so that's also a very powerful card, and has been and will be throughout the whole life of the game. Like, people put 3 copies of unexpected courage in a deck, owning the whole card pool. So, there's a lot of really good cards there. I'm not sure if there's other cards other than Aragorn and I guess there's the not Grim Resolve. What's the one that readies all characters in play?
There's Grim Resolve. That's
Grim
the
Resolve,
5
right?
cost
Okay,
ship event that readies all characters.
right.
And you also have Common Cause, but Common Cause is a net 0 action advantage because you have to exhaust a hero to ready one.
Right.
But usually that's what you're trying to do with that card is exhaust a hero that has lesser stats or the stat you don't want to ready one that has the stat you do want.
Right.
So like, exhausting I guess I might have to go outside the core set, or exhausting like Thalon to ready up Aragorn is probably a net positive on the whole, because Aragorn's got better willpower, better attack, more hit points to defend with.
Yeah. Where I see Common Cause used in the core set is if you have Thalon and Gimli. So like you leave Thalon ready and Gimli ready, Gimli will defend, get all that damage, and then you use Common Cause to exhaust Thalon and then ready Gimli, and now that he's got all that damage, and then he can attack back. So there's a couple of neat little tricks that you can find on your own. That's just one neat little trick. Plus we're doing all the core combos thing. So we've talked a little bit about hero selection, cost curve, card breaks, sphere mixes. Yeah. What about card type and a good mix of card type?
So in general, you want to prioritize allies and attachments because those are going to be out on the board, and you got to build up a board state to deal with the enemies and locations that are coming off the encounter deck, right? And so I believe when I started, the general rule of thumb was something like 25 allies, as many attachments as you could reasonably fit into the deck for the spheres you're matching up, and then events were last. And it's usually like just include the ones that you're going to use. So like if you're playing Spirit Tactics, it's probably going to be like Test of Will, Feint, and then maybe Hasty Stroke if you're worried about shadow effects.
There's some pretty nasty shadow effects in the game.
Yeah. So, I guess Galadriel's Greeting would be the other one you might swap in there.
Right.
But yeah.
Which brings us to this 50 card minimum. So Matt, I don't know how you feel about this. I have some feels about the 50 card minimum, but what's your... So there's 2, maybe 3 camps. There's the people who will only play 50 cards because it's there's this thing called brain fart. Reliability, not reliability. Consistency, right. Deck consistency. There's people who will say, I'll go up to 52, 53 if I really need the cards. And then there's people that are like, I don't care about deck size. I'm going to build my 80 card deck and nobody can tell me otherwise. So Matt, where are you in that?
I skew towards 50 as close as possible. But I'm not like must be exactly 50. I'll go to like 53, 54 sometimes. It's back when I was a Magic the Gathering player, I did the math on the increasing chances of drawing a certain card after you drew one card off the top of your deck. And Magic has 60 card decks, so the math was a little funkier than it is with this one. This one's a little nicer because 50 is like 2% per card.
Right.
But once you draw one off, it's the chance is pretty incremental. So it's like a few cards isn't going to make or break, finding that next card a little faster. but it's when you talking 50 to 80, that changes things quite a bit. It's
Well,
like,
and that's
that's
why
too
I
much.
picked that's why I picked 80 is
Yeah.
because it's such a, and the pre-con decks that are being released soon, I guess, are 82 cards in them. So I would assume it's 3 heroes plus 79 player cards, but 79 is not divisible by 3, so I don't know exactly what's going on. But
I can only hope that there's extensive sideboards.
well, right, you don't have to play all 82 cards, of course, but I back to let me put myself back on track here.
Yep.
I agree with you for the most part. There's that you I am not beholden to the 50 card limit. I think that when you do the math, an 80 card deck is too big. There may be some cases to run an 80 card deck, but I'm not beholden to 50. I think that the reason why people stick to 50 is because it really forces those people to look at cards to find out if they are really necessary in a deck. If you have a card and you think all 55 cards are necessary in a deck, then play it. By all means, play it. Nobody's going to yell at you or get mad at you or, whatever. You play your 55 card deck. But the interesting thing to do is to play it against Journey Along the Anduin and see how many of those 55 cards you were like, oh my gosh, I never once used Grim Resolve.
Strength of Will or something.
Yeah. Will of the West, right? Like, I never use those cards. So I shouldn't include it in my deck. That's just something. And so you take out those copies of the cards. And and I also think you were right on, Matt, when you were like, half allies ish, and then, a bunch of attachments that you think you're going to need, and then, round it out with events. So typically it's in my book, it's usually like 25 allies, 12 to 15 attachments, and the rest events, right? Because there's some good events, right? And then you should always play Gandalf. Like, when you're building out of the core set, you should not use Gandalf, right? Like, is that I don't ever see a case where you're building a deck using just the core set and you're not, because it's such a good card that
right,
you're really crippling yourself when you're not using Gandalf.
Right. So the optionality on him is just too strong, and he's neutral. So you can pay for him with any resources at all. So he's not impacting your sphere mix in any way, shape, or form.
Right.
And, the main thing is usually just how much of Gandalf, since he's 5 cost. So, if you find yourself drawing him too early, too often, you might go down to 2.
You're going to play 3 Gandalfs in every single one of your deck. Let me just tell you that right now. Especially if you're playing leadership. Leadership, you're going to sneak attack Gandalf. That combination is still, to this day, super powerful with the whole card pool. It's great because you have a lot of choice. You have a lot, you can lower threat, draw cards, and or do damage, and then still use his stats for whatever. You're including 3 Gandalfs. But now this brings us to maybe our last point, is how many of each card to include in your deck. Like, do I need 3 Northern Trackers, and do I need 3 Faramir's? And I bring those 2 cards up on purpose because one is not unique and the other one is unique. And, that's always a thing. So, what's your rule of thumb for that, Matt?
At least when I'm first building a deck, I try to include 3 copies of everything, because you don't really know how much you need it. But then I also then take a look at my cost curve, I first pass through to be like, okay, where we sit. do we have too many high cost cards? And then I'll start looking to trim those higher cost ones like Northern Tracker and Faramir. And usually I'll give the preference to trimming the uniques first, just to avoid a dead card, because it's easy enough to run 2 uniques and still have a reasonable chance of seeing it, and then not see the second copy as a dead card in your hand later.
Yeah, I again, Matt, it's almost like you and I are running the same playbook here. I think it's important that you put multiple copies of cards in your deck. Very rarely do you want to just play one of. There are cards that are fun that if you see and you want to play them and you're like, oh, this is fun, I can do that. I've been recently teaching somebody how to play the game, and we put one copy of Dark Knowledge in a deck as just one copy, and that came out, and we were like, let's see what happens. We played it. It may be the first time that Dark Knowledge ever hit the board in my years and years of playing, and you know what? It's a pretty fun, decent card to play with. You put it on Gimli, not questing anyways. It's good stuff. But what you want to know is you want 3 copies of the cards that you want to see the most, for the most part. If you, despite it being unique or not unique, if you really need Steward of Gondor to get resource acceleration, you should put 3 copies of Steward of Gondor. Just even though you may have the other 2 in your hand, you should put 3 copies in there.
Well, I think that's where the cost matters too. Steward of Gondor is 2 cost.
It is.
Yep. So, it's a lot easier to include extra copies of the lower cost cards. Mm-hmm. So when you get up to the 4 or 5 cost cards that you're like, I really want to see these later in the game. I don't want them in my opening hand. Right. That it's like, it's easier to cut those down to 2.
Yeah. And I have a general rule that, I don't know, that uniques are the first thing that I cut down to 2 anyways, because I can always play non-uniques anytime, right? But if there's other uniques on the board and I can't play them, then it is what it is. And Eowyn is always a great hero to start with, because she's questing for a whole bunch, and you can always pitch extra cards in your hand to her to raise her willpower. It's there's no downside to Eowyn, really. So I don't know. Plus, there's Protector of Lorien, I guess, is the other card that you can discard cards to in the lore sphere. So I don't know, but I think I think as a novice deck builder in this game, I think it's good to not try to get too tricky and just kind of stick to the general guidelines. Pick some good heroes that you want to play with for whatever reason, whether you're deciding based on the scenario or you're deciding because you want to see a certain combination play because they're combo, whatever. Think about your cost curve, think about, the sphere mixing. Consider, having about half of your cards allies, run 2 or 3 copies of all those cards, attachments, events, fill in the rest. And I think you're going to have a pretty solid deck. As long as they have some sort of, cohesion that goes along with it. And I think that, like we started off talking about the spheres, I think the spheres themselves have cohesion anyways, so it's going to be hard to really, I don't know, screw up a deck. Is that, I don't know, there's some non-combinations that you don't want to put in a deck, but I think that it's going to be hard to screw up a deck. Is that fair to say, Matt? I don't know.
I could see a couple pitfalls that if you're not thinking too much about what your board state ultimately is going to look like, where you could screw up combining spheres to make a deck. It's like you could put the allies together, but you may not be paying attention to how much willpower do I have amongst these? And if I'm playing, tactics lore, and I'm using Denethor, Thalon, and Legolas, there's not a lot of starting willpower there. And if I'm putting in, veteran axe hands that have 0 willpower and not anything else, like you need that willpower to ramp up because you're not going to travel to every location. Some enemies aren't going to engage right away, and you don't want to, because you don't want to get overwhelmed. And you're going to see things like brown lands and the treacheries that increase threat in the staging area. So you're going to want to have enough allies come out with at least a willpower, if not 2, and build up your tableau to say, okay, when I turn these guys, we're going to start getting our willpower up to 4, 6, 8, and eventually be questing into the double digits by the end game.
Well, Matt, I think anytime you use the word tableau, like in a deck building episode, I think that's a good cue there to kind of cut this kind of basics of deck building off, and then we will continue our discussion about tableaus of deck building here. That's not exactly the context that you used it in, but nonetheless, I will. How about we cut the basics show here, and then we'll come back for show number 2 for deck building, and we'll talk about like more advanced considerations. And again, with the core set, there's not a ton necessarily to think about, but maybe, playing solo versus multiplayer, some of those considerations, maybe a little more detail about playing versus the encounter deck as opposed to playing, building a deck just for yourself. So, Matt, are you going to be able to join us for that episode? I think the community would really love to hear your opinions.
Oh, well, if the community wants it, I will try to make a time for them.
Okay, great. And so, everybody, that's our show on deck building. Join us again as we talk about further considerations from deck building next time. Have a great day, everybody.
Do you love the content? Here's what you can do to stay connected. Become a patron. The money collected through Patreon goes into keeping the lights on here at the podcast. We love our patrons, and you can join at many different levels. Visit patreon.com/cardtalk2018. You can subscribe to us, whether you're watching our YouTube channel or you're listening to us in your favorite podcatcher. Hit the subscribe button to get notifications of all our new episodes. Didn't know we were an audio podcast? Find us by searching Card Talk to get access to our 120 plus regular episodes. Didn't know we were a video channel? Find us by searching Card Talk LOTR LCG on YouTube, and there you can find not only our regular episodes, but you can find our bonus playthroughs and other content related to the game. Want to get a hold of Ted, Grant, or myself? Feel free to email the podcast at cardtalk2018@gmail.com.